This YouTuber disappeared and got exposed for allegedly scamming his followers for $100,000 through an alleged rigged betting scheme on a live stream. And when people started inevitably asking questions, his sponsor claimed he passed away, all while at the same time claiming that he'd been arrested by Saudi intelligence. So obviously after hearing all that, you're probably thinking, what is going on here? Well, I guess this is just the latest chapter in one of the more bizarre influencer rabbit holes that's been out there. Because this is Miles Rowledge, a 25-year-old from Birmingham, England, who goes by Lord Miles online. And the Lord part is literally from a 15-pound joke certificate that he bought online from established titles, if I remember correctly. And that technically gave him the right to use the title, even though he's definitely not a man of high status. But he even managed to actually get the Lord printed onto his credit card after he talked to the bank, and the whole thing became a part of his persona. And this also allegedly saved his life as well. But Miles grew up as an only child in the small neighborhood of Birmingham, England, and had a fairly normal education. Later on, he went to university to study physics, but then a year later switched to finance. And here he established the university's investment banking society, and he also started taking online Harvard classes in 2021. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because the guy seemed to be on a pretty conventional path towards finance, but in 2019, something changed following Christmas exams during the first term of university. Miles was invited by a friend to spend winter vacation exploring Chernobyl, and apparently that trip awakened something within him, a fascination with visiting dangerous or restricted or otherwise off-limits places. And even later on bragged about bribing a security guard in Chernobyl to let him keep the mask that he had taken, and then I guess he later on sold that mask to cover the cost of the trip. But this is when Miles discovered the world of danger tourism. And as the name suggests, it's a practice where people deliberately travel to dangerous locations, so like active war zones or disaster areas for the thrill, but nowadays mostly for social media content. So by 2021, Miles was essentially Googling most dangerous countries to visit and using that list as a travel itinerary. And in March, he started planning what would become his most infamous trip yet: Afghanistan. According to him, he wanted to see what life in Afghanistan was like, visit historical Christian sites, and maybe do some charity work. The visa and the flight cost him a little over $1,000, but I guess not too long after purchasing the ticket, he started to have some doubts until he discovered that he couldn't get a refund. So, as you can imagine, he just decided to go through with it anyway. So to fully understand why Miles' trip to Afghanistan was so reckless, you kind of need to understand what was happening there in August of 2021. Because, you know, after 20 years of American military presence, the United States announced that it was withdrawing all of its troops from Afghanistan. And the NATO-backed Afghan government was supposed to maintain control in their absence, but the Taliban, a militant political group that had ruled Afghanistan before 2001, launched a play to take the country back immediately. And throughout the summer of 2021, the Taliban was steadily capturing territory, moving towards the capital city of Kabul. US intelligence assessments in early August suggested it would take at least 30 to 90 days before the city would fall. But the situation was clearly unstable and was getting worse fast. And at this time, the UK Foreign Office had already issued warnings against all travel to the country and was urging British nationals to leave immediately. Miles, however, decided this was the perfect time to hop on a plane and go visit. So he prepared for his trip with a GPS-enabled SOS button, planned regular updates to friends online about his whereabouts, and he set up a dead man's switch, which automatically posted on his Facebook if he failed to check in. And I'm assuming this is just announcing the end of his life or his disappearance. He was also joking about that 15-pound Lord certificate, saying that might actually come in handy and potentially save his life, assuming that the Taliban might see the title and think that he was actually worth keeping alive for negotiation power. And what's crazy is he might have been right, because on August 13th, 2021, Miles flew into Kabul from Turkey with a return flight scheduled on August 19th. That gave him 6 days in Afghanistan before he was scheduled to leave. But just one single day into the trip, it was clear things in Afghanistan were already becoming extremely chaotic, with local people doing bank runs before the banks completely collapsed. So overall, things were looking seriously scary, and when they realized this, him and his guide tried to reach the British embassy. And here, Miles was apparently disguised in a burqa to avoid any detection, and when they arrived, they found out the embassy had already been evacuated and was completely deserted. So they had no choice but to just head for the airport, and on August 15th, just 2 days after Miles arrived, Kabul fell to the Taliban. The Afghan government completely collapsed within hours, and the president fled the country just before the Taliban fighters entered the presidential palace. But here's the problem. Along with Miles, thousands of Afghans who had worked with Western forces rushed to the airport as well in desperate attempts to evacuate, leading to scenes of absolute chaos in the entire city. Miles then decided to start posting on 4chan that he was in a bit of a pickle, and suddenly his real-time updates from inside Kabul during its fall started getting attention worldwide. And in an interview, he said that he accepted his end and was fully prepared for it, since, in quote, there was no convincing me otherwise and I knew the risks. But when people started raising money to help him escape, he told them to donate to charity instead, essentially telling his followers to focus on the people who actually needed help and not him who put himself in that situation to begin with. And specifically, he mentioned his tour guide, who apparently helped save his life, but was being denied entry to a safe house because he wasn't from a NATO country. Miles, on the other hand, found refuge in a UN safe house along with about 50 other foreign citizens. But here's where it gets interesting, because 4chan users were actually researching Taliban movements in real time and providing Miles with updates on where they were advancing, helping him avoid the most dangerous areas, and he later recognized that even though 4chan is clearly a toxic place with horrendous things on there, the people who replied actually gave good information, resulting in saving his life on multiple occasions. And on August 17, 2021, he was evacuated to Dubai on a British Army plane. And after a short quarantine period, which was required because, a pandemic was going on then as well, Miles then returned to England. And once Miles got back to the UK, his story went mainstream, with media around the world covering the British student stuck in Afghanistan. And with that, Miles became this sort of like viral symbol of reckless tourism. He did interviews, he had various appearances, and his online following grew exponentially. And it's safe to say that people had very different reactions to what he'd done. But regardless of how people felt, Miles was suddenly known worldwide. And in November of 2021, he signed a publishing contract with the book Lord Miles in Afghanistan. And that book was actually released a year later. However, here's where the story takes a turn from danger tourism to something brand new. Because Miles didn't just go visit Afghanistan once, write his book, and move on. He actually went back multiple times to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. He started building this whole narrative around being friends with the Taliban commanders. So now we're in April of 2022, and Miles has returned to Taliban-ruled Afghanistan for a second trip. And to prepare, he emptied his entire room and stored all of his belongings. He also gave his roommate the keys to access everything, just in case the trip went poorly and he didn't return. He then traveled through various countries to avoid being detained by authorities who might try to stop him from entering Afghanistan. And while there, he was being interviewed by the Afghan television station called Baria TV. And then came a bunch of videos of him joining parades and other activities with the Taliban. Then for some reason, he even tried to sell Taliban merchandise, attempting to use eBay to sell Taliban branded headbands, which were initially taken down before eBay apologized and said the listings would be restored. And in June of 2022, his Instagram account was suspended after he posted a selfie with an armed Taliban fighter. But despite his profile getting banned, he always kept coming back. And throughout all of this, Miles cultivated this narrative that he had developed a genuine friendship with Taliban leadership. And he claimed he found them very entertaining and goofy, and he was regularly invited to picnics and dinners with commanders, and that they genuinely enjoyed his company and, I guess, read his book about his time in Afghanistan. But of course, in the meantime, Miles didn't just stay in Afghanistan. He traveled to several other dangerous places around the world, like Kazakhstan, Ukraine just before the war started, and Sudan, and so on and so on. So I mean, it's safe to say that Miles is building this whole persona of this like untouchable adventurer who could go anywhere, befriend anyone, even the Taliban, and always somehow just came out of all of this unscathed. But in early of 2023, everything finally started to catch up with him, because in February, Miles embarked on what he claimed was his third official trip to Afghanistan. And shortly after this trip began, he was apprehended by the Taliban's General Director of Intelligence, basically the Taliban's secret police and internal security force. And here, Miles was detained alongside of Kevin Cornwall, a 53-year-old British charity medic, alongside of another unidentified British national who managed a hotel in Kabul. According to reports, they were arrested in a raid after Taliban agents accused Cornwall of having an illegal firearm in a safe in his hotel room. Now, while Miles was supposedly in Taliban custody for the next 8 months, his Twitter account kept posting increasingly strange claims about his detention that painted a picture completely different from what Cornwall and all the other detainees were allegedly experiencing. The account claimed as he got arrested with $1,300 in his pocket, he was basically living in luxury. And this ranged from ordering takeaway to buying movies at the market. Apparently he was chilling. And here you have a post that says, in quote, "At first, like all of you, I was worried he was struggling in some bad place. But then he described how the Taliban liked the Titanic movie and Rambo 3. And if he wants eggs, his servants go buy him eggs. If he doesn't like a dish, he gets pizza. When we called him, he said it's a lovely holiday." Now, meanwhile, according to the Presidium Network, Kevin Cornwall was critically ill. His condition had not improved, and the conditions that he and the other prisoners were kept in were nothing short of horrific. The organization was warning that it was extremely likely that both men would die in custody and that their health situation should be treated with concern by international community. And the account claiming to speak for Miles even said that he was aware of Cornwell's kidney problems and had volunteered to give him a kidney transplant while in Afghanistan if he was a match. So obviously there is some serious contrast between these two narratives. You have Miles supposedly having picnics and eating pizza, chilling with the Taliban. Meanwhile, Cornwell was critically ill in horrific conditions. So what's going on there? Miles is eventually released from the Taliban custody in October of 2023 after roughly 8 months of detention alongside of Kevin Cornwell and the other British nationals. And in March of 2024, he uploaded a YouTube video describing his experience of being captured by the Taliban. And this further built this narrative that he had some special relationship with his captures. This video is no longer up because either he deleted or privated these videos. However, despite all of that, this entire story is nothing more than a look back at his past controversies, and they mainly serve to help us understand who Lord Miles is and how events unfolded to get up to this point. Which brings us to his most recent stunt a few months ago, one that took his whole dangerous adventure persona to just a whole new level, because he just decided to announce that he was going to do a 40-day water fast in the desert in Saudi Arabia. This means that he can only drink water for 40 days straight, and he'd live stream himself 24/7 to prove that he wasn't cheating. And the challenge was featured on Polymarket, a platform where people can bet real money on whether various events would happen or not. People would essentially bet whether Miles would compete in the full 40 days, and the official Polymarket account was promoting it so heavily that the betting volume eventually reached over $14 million. And since Miles has essentially been a polarizing figure from the start of his career, combined with the fact that people don't always trust everything he says and that users naturally tend to question the legitimacy of platforms like Polymarket, he knew that many followers' first instinct would be to suspect that the challenge might be rigged for his own benefit. And with that in mind, he addressed the obvious conflict of interest problem right from the start, saying he wasn't allowed to bet on himself and that betting on yourself was a very bad thing. He claimed that he was doing well financially and didn't need to 10x his money or something like that.
Did you bet on yourself on Polymarket? No, I'm not allowed. Betting on yourself is a very bad thing. You know what I mean? I'm doing well financially right now. I don't need to 10x my money or something. But yeah, people were like, oh, why aren't you betting yourself on Polymarket? You can do it using alt accounts. I know my friends are betting me on Polymarket because they basically get like updates from me personally, and I just tell them, hey, I'm doing just fine.
He also claimed that someone on Polymarket had DM'd his friend Morgan, offering him $30,000 to end the challenge early and just, eat cake on his birthday and call it quits.
Someone on Polymarket has DM'd Morgan on Instagram and offered $30,000 for me to end the challenge around my birthday. They said, eat the birthday cake, don't worry about it. Well, this is my personal decision if I should end the fast.
Apparently, he declined that offer, and Miles made it clear throughout the challenge that he was all in. His followers bet heavily on him completing it, but then Miles disappeared from the challenge. He literally disappeared. And this is where things start to get pretty insane, because first, the CEO of Duel, the company posting Miles' challenge, posted that Miles' death was confirmed, claiming that he had fallen into a coma after hospital staff gave him a glucose IV without his consent, and they posted on their socials, RIP Lord Miles. That's when my red flag started going off, because I was like, they faked his death before. Because I'm gonna be real here, this would not be the first time someone claimed that he passed away. And around this time, Miles' tweets got privated, and of course his YouTube videos also disappeared. But then suddenly a different story emerged. Miles' official account, which was being ran by his friend, said that he had actually been detained by Saudi intelligence on false charges, created by an American who had bribed a corrupt journalist to manipulate the Polymarket odds and make money. The post claimed that Miles had spent 2 weeks without seeing sunlight and remained in custody, and that his communication was extremely limited. I do also want to note though, like his original post said detain me, but was later edited to detain him, which is, a little bit suspicious. Could this have been like one of those, what is it called? Like a Freudian slip? Freudian slip, right? No, I think that's what it is. A Freudian slip. Could it actually be Miles behind the account all along and he did that quick little mistake and then went, oh, I gotta fix it, gotta edit it. Who knows? But later, updates claimed that Miles was forced to eat in the hospital by police after 34 days of fasting, and that he wouldn't have done it otherwise. They then continued pushing this narrative that people were betting against Miles had gotten him detained to rig the outcome. But then, the other creator by the name of CoffeeZilla decided to investigate, and what he found was pretty damning. CoffeeZilla traced Miles' Ethereum address, which Miles had previously posted publicly, and discovered that Miles had received $16,000 during his fast. Less than 1 hour later, Miles then sent $15,000 of those dollars to another address, which then sent $14,000 to a relay solver, which is a bridge on Polymarket to a specific betting account. That betting account was titled Money Money Please, I Want to Make Money, I Hate My Job, which is believable because out of all the jobs in the world, I could argue that Lord Miles' job is one of the most dangerous and insufferable jobs to ever do. But this account made $61,000, with most of that profit coming from betting against Miles finishing the 40-day water fast.
Miles has previously posted his Ethereum address, which we can use to trace all of his activity.
Some guy was meant to pay me 16K today.
Around that time, we see the Lord Miles Ethereum address get paid $16,000 during his fast. Well, less than an hour later, Lord Miles sends 15,000 of those dollars to this address, OX613, who then sends $14,000 an hour later to this relay solver, which is a bridge on Polymarket. That's an account that has made $61,000 titled Money, Money, Please. Want to make money. I hate my job. And most of his money has come from a bet on Lord Miles not finishing the 40-day water fast.
So it's safe to say that is suspicious. And Coffee also found another transaction where Miles sent $9,000 in Ethereum to an address, which then was bridged to Polygon. And then literally 7 seconds later, that same amount appeared in the betting account, was used to place multiple bets against Miles again. And the blockchain evidence lined up perfectly with this betting activity.
I traced yet another transaction. This is Lord Miles' Ethereum address sending $9,000 in Tether to this OX613. And that account then sends $9,000 to this relay solver. It's a bridge to Polygon. Literally 7 seconds later, this account gets basically $9,000 minus a few bucks in fees for the bridge. And then that account puts a bunch of bets on Polymarket. Now we can actually see those transactions lining up perfectly with the bets made by this Money, Money, Please account. The first one for $2,000. We see $2,000 here, $500, $500, $1,000, $1,000, $54.85.
So obviously, there's no way to 100% prove this, but it seems like Miles was secretly placing bets against himself while participating in a challenge and encouraging his followers to bet on him. So if this is true, he's scamming his fans. And Coffee estimated between the Polymarket bets, which was around $60,000, and the pump fund Miles launched, which was $31,000, and the $16,000 he received, Miles walked away with roughly $100,000 from this whole scheme. When Coffee reached out for a comment, someone claiming to be Miles' friend eventually provided a statement supposedly from Miles. And the statement claimed that these accusations make no sense because Miles does plenty of business and YouTube isn't his main income source. According to the statement, his main business is mining and exporting from Afghanistan, such as Bin Laden's car, valued at $1.2 million. It's like, oh look, I'm making so much money, why would I ever scam? That's such a bad excuse because we've covered so many people that have a bunch of money who also were outed for scamming. Unfortunately for some people, greed makes it so they never have enough, so I am not buying that excuse at all. They did admit though that the betting accounts in question belong to an Afghan national who helps Miles transfer money due to international sanctions, and that crypto is ideal for this. In other words, they're basically saying, yeah, Miles sent money to that account, but he didn't know the Afghan helper was betting against him. So that's also an interesting statement. So it's like, oh, I didn't know that I was technically scamming my fans. But the statement also claimed that Miles was detained by Saudi authorities for up to 6 months without charges because someone who knew his location realized how much money they could make by doxing him. So if none of this seemed credible, honestly, it's hard to blame anyone for thinking that. The simplest explanation here is that Miles rigged his own challenge, bet against himself through intermediaries, and made about $100,000, and then created an elaborate story about being detained to explain why he disappeared and couldn't finish this challenge. But who knows? We can only speculate here. Then obviously you have the sponsor that claimed he passed away, the edited tweets switching from detain me to detain him, the perfectly timed blockchain transactions showing money going from Miles to betting accounts within hours. So I mean, if you just connect those dots, it all points to one direction. However, on October 5th, 2025, CoffeeZilla posted an update on his own investigation. And since Miles' own Twitter account remained private at the time, it's good to get some clarity on what actually happened. Because he wrote, I was skeptical of the Lord Miles detainment in Saudi Arabia, but today I personally confirmed it with the UK FCDO spokesperson. And here in the screenshots, it reads as a request for clarification regarding the online claim that a British national using the name Lord Miles is currently detained in Saudi Arabia by Saudi intelligence. And an official response was, we are supporting a British man detained in Saudi Arabia and are in touch with the local authorities. Then one day later, Miles' official account posted the official document from the British embassy in Riyadh, further corroborating the news that he'd actually been arrested. So, looking back, what started as a guy who went viral for a wild trip in Afghanistan during a Taliban takeover has turned into years of increasingly questionable and often outright shocking behavior. Platform bans, bizarre claims about friendships with the Taliban, and now allegedly scamming his own followers out of 6 figures. And I guess this was all to ultimately end up behind bars in Saudi Arabia. How long is he gonna be there? Who knows? Was it worth it? Probably not, honestly. I feel like this is just too much risk for too little return. Obviously, 100 grand is a crazy amount of money, but he's playing an extremely risky game here, and I don't know 100 grand is worth to do that. But the confirmation from official sources leave no room for doubt. Miles is definitely in custody. So I mean, all the speculation and theories online at least has a concrete answer now. So at least for the next 6 months, even though Miles' lawyer says there are likely 0 charges against against him, he'll probably be behind bars. But also, I mean, again, as I previously mentioned, after everything this guy's been through, being arrested almost kind of feels normal for his career. So it's not like I'm shocked by that outcome, because that is probably one of the more predictable things out of everything here. So I guess as of right now, we'll just kind of wait and see what happens next. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. But overall, I have a feeling that the story for Lord Miles is far from over. Peace.